everyone. Welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers, Josh and Dan, I'm Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things trollical. So if you have any questions for us about anything you're about to hear, please contact us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. We're going to talk about two troll moots today and kind of where they're located on the map. We're going to talk about the eastern Twilight Peaks a little bit and the Stoneclaw Moot and the Swiftwind Moot.
Yeah, and I am probably going to let Dan talk a little bit more in this episode because we're recording this right after the previous episode that you might have listened to, which is me doing a lot of talking, and it is late locally.
Which is fine.
And my voice is starting to get just a touch sore. I will chime in, but you will hear a lot more from Dan in this episode than you did last week.
That's not why people listen. They don't listen for me.
They listen
I know this.
For you. Stop
it's okay. So, we're going to talk about the map a little bit here real quick, just to give some setting to both of the troll moots we're going to talk about here, because they're located kind of in the same spot on the map. So if you take a look at the eastern Twilight Peaks, because I'm having a map here in my hand, we're kind of down in the lower southwest corner of the map. So pretty much from Scavia and the Dalaris Mountains, kind of that little cross section in there, all the way down to Death Sea. So that's where the Twilight Peaks are, the Kingdom of Ustrecht, a little bit north of Carafad, all of that fun stuff. So the eastern section of that, just north of Scavia in the Twilight Peaks, this is where the center of that is where stands Mount Angrak, which is an active volcano, which does occasionally spew forth into the mist swamps, which eventually leads into the Scarlet Sea, which leads into the Death Sea, so forth and so on. So it's a big chain of all this fun stuff going on. Angrak in troll means anger. So this is Mount Anger. And if you don't know an angry troll, I'm sorry for you, because angry trolls are just fun to deal with. So to the east of Mount Angrak is the Stoneclaw Moot. Heading further west is the Swiftwind Moot. We'll deal with those kind of in backwards order. There is an eastern spur, and it towers over the Servos banks of the Serpent River, and this is where most name givers really avoid the area of the eastern spur. Do you know why? Josh, please tell us.
Not off the top of my head, because I did not really do any refresher or research on this beforehand.
Fair. This is like inhospitable areas. They send, I can say new Watts or new recruits, they send younglings here to go test their mettle, and if they can survive for 3 days there and then come back, they get to, be part of the tribe. If they don't survive there, it was just survival of the fittest, and so Darwin's law takes effect, and they're killed off because it's really inhospitable, lots of nasty creatures around, fun things like that.
Just looking at my PDF here, the eastern spur, it's got the mist swamps right up against it. It's got Mount Angrak at sort of the other end, and so you've got rough, nasty, inhospitable areas.
So it's living on a mountain, no shelter, no food, things like that. So that is the generalized area we're going to talk about here. So keep that focused in your mind. Mount Angrak, by the way, is where the Fireblood talent was developed.
According to legend.
By trolls. According to Troll-like legend, because they're going to take credit for that, because why not? If you can, do. And this is also a little thing of note. True Fire and Living Crystal from Mount Angrak is blood red, not crystal blue like all the other Crystal Raider armaments and weapons you'll find. So if you get it straight from Mount Angrak, it's blood red. I just thought that was a neat little thing to throw in there in case you happen to like coloring photos like I do from the main rulebook. I do those things there. Starting west of Mount Angrak is the Stoneclaw Moot. They're kind of a more progressive version of a troll moot than most of the rest of them are. They have adopted many of the Throlic ways, customs, manners, clothing, so forth and so on. Others see the Stoneclaw Moot, that they have adopted all these ways, as a weakness. So the Stoneclaws are viewed as lesser than and weaker by all the other troll moots around, and they are often raided by those other troll moots because, again, we talked about this a couple of episodes ago. The trolls see it as if you are strong enough to hold on to your things, then you therefore deserve them. Since the Stoneclaws are not holding on to their ways, their troll ways, they're instead adopting the Throlic ways, they're therefore seen as weak. and the other moots will raid them on purpose to see exactly how strong they still are or not. This has caused a bitter blood feud with Bloodlore Moot.
Everybody has a bitter feud with the Bloodlore Moot. We will talk about them in a few weeks.
Yes.
The Stoneclaws are the way that they are in part because they have adopted a number of dwarf clans in among their number. And that mixing of cultures is part of what has sort of made the Stoneclaws the way that they are and made them most appropriate or most suitable for alliance with Throal. Certainly in the Crystal Raiders book, it is sort of strongly hinted that Nedin, who was king at the time sort of that this book was set, was looking to the Stoneclaws Moot first as the initial one that they would work with and reach out to while building the alliance that would go up against the Therans for the Second War, because of some of the cultural similarities that they had with the dwarves and the influence that they had on the Stoneclaws Moot. And then, as a result of perhaps that alliance or partnership, that they could then leverage that to work with other troll moots in the Twilight Peaks to bring their forces together in this activity.
Totally. So a little bit of history on them. The Stoneclaws Moot formed somewhat later than others when scattered clans in the Eastern Peaks banded together for protection against rival clans from the other side of Mount Engrak, which again we'll get to in a little bit, that would later form the Swiftwind Moot. We'll get to them the other half of the episode. So in the early days of the Orichalcum Wars, the Stoneclaws permitted a Throlic company to mine Orichalcum, true earth and metals from their territory, materials which the troll clans had little interest in. These are not things that they care about. And because this territory lay further from the Theran stronghold of the Vane, and because the raids against Theran targets were kind of infrequent compared to those of the Western troll moots, the Stoneclaws, which we're talking about today, were spared the Theran reprisals leading up to and during the Battle of Sky Point.
Yeah, which might be another reason why the Bloodlords, who are one of the Western clans, don't like the Stoneclaws, because they suffered where the Stoneclaws did not to that extent.
Yeah.
So that position that they had and the arrangement that they had with the mining companies in their territory and their greater proximity to Central Barsave, the Kingdom of Throal and so forth, led them to a more cosmopolitan attitude than others, hence the adoption of the dwarf clans into their moot. And they had the most abundant and strongest kaers of any of the troll moots of the Twilight Peaks, because they had that existing relationship with the dwarfs that allowed that construction to happen better than it was for the other moots.
Yeah. So it was one of those, that's how the Stoneclaws became unique compared to the other moots, is that they integrated with the dwarves during the long night, during the Scourge. And so when they came back out again, they had adopted some of those customs and thought that it was a good thing that they're making progress toward not living such a hard scrabble lifestyle on the top of a mountain, that they could begin to not just raid other moots, but they actually could begin to trade and barter with other moots. And so therefore they can evolve their society in those ways. So the Stoneclaws Moot is basically like 20 clans all working together. They're led by Kerththale Farseer Stoneclaws. He's an 8th, 9th Circle Sky Raider, and he's got 4 co-wives and 2 co-husbands.
Yes.
In his...
the line marriage of the troll moots.
So it's again, troll culture is fascinating to just read about. If you just pick up the Crystal Raiders book, it's fantastic. If you don't pick up the book at all, it's still fascinating to know about, and just how each moot is individually different. There are 2 other people of note in the Stoneclaws Moot. One is Drogar Firebeard Rocktapper of the Rocktapper clan. He's very progressive, and he's a 7th Circle weaponsmith. And then there's Gartan Strong Fist Heartspear. I love all these names. He's the Traditionalist, who's occasionally at odds with Drogar, and Gartain is an 8th Circle Sky Raider as well.
And a Questor of Thestonius.
Yes. Just the interesting dichotomy of personalities and how they interact with one another is enough to play with right there if you ever come across the Stoneclaws Moot. Just happen to drop by and maybe have dinner at one of their feasts or something like that. So the Stoneclaws raid east and north. They hit farming villages, rarely the Serpent River because these are airships and not riverboats. So there's a big difference there. And they know better than to mess with anybody on those rivers because we talked about all the house
shenanigans,
all the houses of the Serpent River. Yeah, all the house shenanigans down there as well. So they know better. They just know, stick to what we can do. But they do sometimes raid the Western Peaks, where the Bloodlore and the Black Fang Moots are. And again, they are officially at war with the Bloodlore Moot, because that's what they do.
Because everybody is.
Because who isn't, yes. But just so you know, little details about the Stoneclaws Moot, they have 10 drakkars, so 10 ships that they have made that are just theirs, 5 on patrol. The rest are hidden in the caves that used to be involved with mining and so forth and so on. Most of those drakkars are armed with catapults, net throwers, and spear throwers.
Yeah, and these are all weapons that are described in the Crystal Raiders book as other weapons that Crystal Raider drakkars might use. So the situation with the Stoneclaws, and this is something that has not really been thought about particularly deeply by me or anybody else really on the development team, because we haven't been focusing on the trolls in the Twilight Peaks really at all. But, the situation that was in place when Crystal Raiders was released, which is prior to the Second War, had a lot of things that were being sort of put into place as opportunities for player characters to interact with these various groups, with the idea that in the broader storyline of Barsave at the time, that they would be working on making alliances with them, maybe at Neden's behest, in order to strengthen the forces of Barsave when it came time to push the Therans out. The Stoneclaws had a really good opportunity where they were located to mess with Theran shipping between Vivane and the Triumph prior to the Second War, because of supply ships and transports and so forth that were going back and forth. And there was a concerted effort by the leader of the Moot, by Kerththale, to not strike Throlic ships.
Yeah.
Seeing them as allies and recognizing the strength they represented, even though they aren't trolls. His close association with the descendants of the Throlic dwarves that worked in the area and then sort of went into the kaers with them, who have adopted sort of trollish ways in their own extent and are now sort of part of and honored members of the Moot. You mentioned Drogar, who is the chief's closest friend and advisor. This kind of relationship. It really plays to the ideas and themes of the strength of diversity, of different peoples working together, and also how it is culture more than what type of name giver you are. The fact that you are a dwarf does not matter so much when you are born into and raised in a Highland troll culture. That culture is going to influence you quite significantly. And I really like how this kind of breaks with the monoculture ideas of the individual name giver races as all sort of being a certain way.
Yeah. Just trolls, just dwarves.
Yeah. There is some recognition of Throal and a connection with Throal that exists there in the distant past. But, and this goes back to what I was talking about actually a couple of weeks ago about the idea of troll honor being something that is sort of defined as Crystal Raider culture or Crystal Raider honor within this group of communities. And so the Bloodlores look at this idea that they have dwarves among their number, the fact that they are sharing their culture with the dwarves or allowing dwarf culture to affect their outlook and whatnot is an insult to troll honor. They are not behaving as trolls should. Again, highlighting sort of the complexities and nuances and how it is not simply a case of, oh, you called me a name, so I'm going to punch you in the face. There is a sort of philosophical underpinning to everything that's going on with this.
Well, yeah, because when I was going through the list of who's important, Kerththale, Farseer, Stoneclaws is, of course, a Sky Raider, therefore he's a troll. Not necessarily therefore, sorry. And Drogar, Rock Tapper, is a dwarf living in there. And Gartan Heartspear is the traditionalist Sky Raider who's also a troll. So you've got two of the three are trolls.
And Gartan is older. Gartan was actually close friends with Farseer's father. Yes. And kind of looks at Farseer as a surrogate son in a way, but is also kind of troubled by some of the things that he's doing in terms of the direction that he was leading the Moot. So, to kind of wrap up our discussion here of the Stoneclaws, the thing to keep in mind, especially if you're playing in the present day, and the things that you might want to think about if you're going to be involving them in a present day campaign or 4th edition, is how has the relationship that the Stoneclaws have with Throal changed in the aftermath of the war and the death of Nedin, and the changes to Throal itself in terms of their own concerns and where they are paying attention to. What has that done in terms of that relationship, and how does that change kind of ripple out to the other moots that interact with them in that area? It's not something that we've actually thought about too deeply or gone to consider, but these are the kind of things that need to be taken into account and might provide you with some ideas of inspiration for adventures or conflicts that could come into play with regards to all of that.
Yeah, because the Crystal Raiders of Barsave book was written at about the same time. Sorry, the plot point in this book is that the Triumph have just landed on Iodia.
Yeah, not and so it's too long ago prior to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's that fresh, and the Second Thern War hadn't happened yet. And so this is still preamble, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago in timeline?
Yeah, in terms of the timeline. So in terms of the original publication plan, this was the last book that was actually published and released for Earthdawn. Dragons was going to be the next book after this, and then I think it was going to be Barsave at War.
Yeah.
So this is setting the stage for the things that would be happening in the Second War. So we're probably looking at this being a year or two before the Second War.
Gotcha.
The relationships are just starting to be developed, and the interactions of the various clans and how they relate to Throal and whatnot are in place as the ground being set for whatever events they decide to put forward, particularly in what would have been, I suspect, the initial chapter of Barsave at War, had it, the original FASA version been done, to have player characters perhaps go and deal with some things to try and bring the troll moots on board for war against Thera.
Fair. I think it's an interesting moot to play around with, because they are so progressive as far as other troll moots are concerned, and their relationship is burgeoning, or at least at the time, was burgeoning with Throal. So, if you run across them, hopefully you're on their good graces, because they will raid still, and they will raid other troll moots as well. So, understanding the personalities in charge of them is, I think, crucial to how you're going to introduce them to your party, if you're the game master. On to the other one on the eastern spur of the Twilight Peaks. This is the Eastern Clan. So the most eastward we can get in the Twilight Peaks, this is the Swiftwind Moot. And there are two main clans. They have many, of course. They are the Firewalker and the Rockfall clans, predominantly. There are other clans in there as well, but these aren't named in the essays. The Swiftwind Moot is renowned as the most talented shipbuilders of all the troll moots, and pretty much anywhere. I even think that the Scrying would be marveling at the shipbuilding prowess of the Swiftwind Moot.
Yes, well, the one who, according to legend, brought the secrets of building airships to the trollmoots was a firewalker. He was part of the Swiftwind Moot. And so that history goes back very, very far in this Moot's history and culture.
Exactly. It was Namar Shipbuilder Firewalker who first brought the secrets of building drakkars to the Rock Falls. And that's kind of where the history of the Swiftwind Moot began. Is they raided Theran vessels during the Orichalcum Wars. They were so their great idea, and this was the wife of one of the leader at the time. Her great idea was to raid the Theran vessels, even though they didn't care about the Orichalcum at all. Ransom that to the highest bidder, either for Thera, who really would do anything to get it, or for Throal, that way they could keep the Therans from having it. So she decided to just raid it, steal it, and leverage it to everybody else.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how the Swiftwind Moot got their claim to fame.
And kind of kicked off the Orichalcum Wars as a result of that.
Yeah. They were just beginning at the edges of maybe what
they kind of helped kick it off.
And then skirmishes.
When the wars went out in full force, they still striked Theran vessels, but they found that there were plenty of other ripe targets as well and took advantage of all of that opportunity.
I was going to say, they became opportunists like crazy. But after the Battle of Skypoint, the Swiftwind Moot saw Thera as absolute mortal enemies on, 4 levels? Something like that? They were just so incensed.
Yeah, this was the first arrival of a behemoth in Barsave, when Thera basically declared empire and said that Barsave was its first province, when they flew a behemoth and bombarded the absolute living hell out of the trollmoots, primarily on the western slopes.
Yeah.
But, in general, and the Swiftwinds, like all of the other trollmoots, swore vengeance, eternal and lasting, on the Therans in retaliation for what they'd done, even though the Swiftwinds did not suffer quite as badly as some of the other moots when it came to that Theran retaliation.
So after the Scourge, the Twilight Peaks were kind of bereft of life, as a lot of places kind of were. But more so, you're living in mountainous regions, probably above the tree line. There's not a lot of food. There's not a lot of trees. There's not a lot of vegetation or animals up there. But now, after the Scourge, there was even less than before. So we talk about a hardscrabble existence. The trolls had even more of a hardscrabble existence at this point once they came out of the kaers. So there were very sparse resources, even fewer trees. So the Swiftwind tried to lay claim to the Grey Forest to the south, on the southern face of the mountains, just over the peak, which put them in absolute direct conflict with the Ironmonger Moot and the Thundersky Moot. Who's surprised?
Yeah. Whose territories are also close to the Grey Forest. The Grey Forest being the primary source of lumber and true wood within the Twilight Peaks, both of which are critical for the construction of airships.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of the brick and mortar per se. Sorry.
Really there is a loose agreement, a loose truce that they will share the resources there, but, fighting still occasionally breaks out when, one clan thinks that another is harvesting more than they should or whatever. And then, of course, that prompts swearing honor vengeance and, the typical kind of rivalries that you get in a situation like that.
Yeah. Because really, when they came out of the kaers and they were trying to find all these resources, nobody could really launch a full-fledged war because you had nothing to start with. So all of them realized, okay, I would draw a knife on you, but I don't have one. Or I would send my army after you, but I don't have one. So let's just agree to share things equally. So this is where negotiation took place first over violence. Hooray. And look at that. The trolls set a nice example for that one. So we dig that. Overall, the Swiftwind Moot is slightly smaller than the Stoneclaws Moot. Clan Firewalker, again, this was all started by Namar Shipbuilder Firewalker. Clan Firewalker is known as the finest crystalsmiths of the Twilight Peaks. So this is the cool thing. The Swiftwind Moot is known as the most talented shipbuilders and has the finest crystalsmiths. So they have two edges on pretty much everybody else.
Yeah.
And They are led by Neral Skybolt, a sixth circle Sky Raider, who is single and not married, and that is a bone of contention.
He is young as well.
Yeah.
He is only 3 years past his rite of passage. It is quite notable that someone so young has managed to achieve the leadership of the entire Moot, because quite frequently Moot leadership is won through a challenge of the current Moot leader.
Yeah.
And so he is a young hothead, but not so hot-headed that he does not listen to the advice of those that he recognizes as being a little bit wiser and more experienced.
So I think your term is apt. He's hot-headed, but he's not arrogant.
Yes.
He's not arrogant enough to think that he knows all and is king of the mountain. He's just hot-headed that he's young. He knows and is wise enough to listen to others' experience in order to lead his Moot. And that's what he's concerned with, really.
Yeah.
Is leading his Moot. He's not worried about getting married. He's not worried about building a family. He's worried about building the best community he possibly can for his troll Moot, which I think is remarkable for somebody that young.
And also potential partners for him need to pass muster with his mother, who is one of his closest advisors.
He's just a hot-headed mama's boy.
Yeah. I think there is quite a potential actually for a certain representation that could be worked in with Neral, in terms of his life and his position and the whole marriage thing.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. Again, he is not already in a line marriage because he is so young. And of course, there is a certain amount of status that would come about as a result of being married, being part of the line marriage to the chief of the Moot. And so I'm sure there are quite a lot of eligible and interested potential partners, suitors for that. But it's interesting. Now, of course, again, this is prior to the Second Theron War. We've had several years since then. That is perhaps an interesting thing to explore. How has the war affected Neral and his approach to governing the Moot? Has he settled down? What is that doing in terms of the relationship, the resource situation? Has the removal of the Therons as a threat perhaps given the Swiftwinds a little bit more leeway to perhaps try and get resources for their shipbuilding from places other than the Grey Forest, so they aren't coming into conflict as much with the other clans that kind of border that area? Is the partnership that may have developed between the Swiftwinds and the Stoneclaws as a result of the war, was there perhaps some rubbing off that might have the Swiftwinds starting to also be a little bit more open to dealing with lowlanders in ways that do not involve landing a ship and punching everybody the way that the Stoneclaws do? Again, things that we have not really considered because we haven't had any kind of products or whatever that are focusing on them. But if you are dealing with the troll moots and the crystal raiders, certainly things to keep in mind with regards to it.
Yeah, you got two good sandboxes here, without a doubt. So also of note in the Swiftwind Moot is Ulig Stoneshaper Firewalker, the finest crystalsmith in the Moot. And she is an old friend of Mount Ungrak and does not fear living near the volcano. In fact, she lives right at the base of it and will spend days upon days looking for just the right crystals to adorn ships, armaments, weapons, clothing, jewelry, whatever. So she's an interesting character to have in there as well. And then the last person of note is Skalag Proudjumper Rockfall, a third circle Sky Raider before he realized his true calling was shipbuilding, and also a seventh circle elementalist. So he's the master shipwright, and he's only 28. So you got some youngins in this one who are kind of savants, really, at what they're doing. And to give everybody the thing, we did the Stoneclaws Moot had 10 drakkars. The Swiftwind Moot has 16 drakkars, 10 or so 10 to 11 with weapons. Spear thrower, net thrower, thunderbolt throwers, different weapon. And they are constantly developing new mechanical ballistas and new fire weapons. So they can bring it in a fight.
Yeah. The Swiftwinds are highly desired as allies. Prior to the war, Nedden was very interested in establishing a relationship with the Swiftwind because of their shipbuilding capabilities and the size of the fleet that they would bring to bear. But Throal is not the only power that was interested in them. Prior to the war, Thera would have been interested in keeping the Swiftwinds from allying with anybody because that would be an additional power. The Denarastis would also be interested in either forging a relationship with them to leverage access to these premier shipwrights. So that's something that could, even in present-day Barsave, could continue to be of interest and a potential challenge with the greater role that the Denarastis are playing in affairs. One of the other potential hooks they kind of mention with regards to Ulig, the crystalsmith, is that she has been getting dreams of a crystal that would be part of a work worthy, like sort of a pinnacle of her craft.
Yeah.
You know, when asked what her finest work is, she usually says, I haven't made it yet. She started having this vision of this crystal, and part of the reason that she's spending so much time on the mountain is to find it in order to create this ultimate sort of a Heartblade kind of approach. And there are a couple of potential hooks that are kind of offered in relation to that, whether these are legitimate visions coming from Upandal or possibly the manipulations of a horror. And my mind immediately goes to Agoastia, the crystal entity that haunts the ruins of Ustrecht, possibly trying to get its hooks into this powerful weaponsmith.
Yeah.
That if it can get its hooks into her to get this crystal that perhaps might be a piece from Agoastia itself or something like that, to make a weapon for the chief that would essentially sort of be a cursed item, and all of the potential problems that could come about as a result of that could potentially be a fascinating campaign arc to deal with if you're going to be involving them. But anybody who is a weaponsmith or an elementalist, an enchanter, especially if they are trolls and interested in airships and whatnot, would probably be very interested in both Ulig and Scalag as the sort of premier practitioners of their crafts. Would definitely be well-known and highly desired individuals to perhaps track down, to train with and whatnot, because they are both reasonably high circle in their primary disciplines.
Well, and also, basically, they all are going to the Grey Forest to get true wood, and they live on the Twilight Peaks, which produces a lot of true fire. So if you have a weaponsmith who needs either one of those elements, you know where to send them. And so no matter what, whatever aspect or avenue they appear in the Twilight Peaks, they're going to come across one of these trollmoots. So you should have them prepared for probably any of them, depending upon where they're coming from, to come across one or more of these important people in these trollmoots as your party is exploring and trying to find the true fire or the true wood that they need for whatever item they're creating. Or if they're researching an item that has the true fire and the true wood, and they need to know where that came from. Well, Twilight Peaks and the Grey Forest are full of it. So probably, if it's one of those two elements, they would have come from one of these two regions. So again, brush up on your trollmoots and see what you can work in that way. Just my 2 cents. So any further thoughts on either one of these trollmoots or anything else on troll culture?
So generally speaking, as we go through this series and we work from east to west across the Twilight Peaks, we talked about when we were going through the various Serpent River houses, how many of them are cast as either sort of good guys or bad guys. That's a little bit simplistic, but whether they tend to be allies of Throal or antagonists.
Yeah.
So you sort of got the House Katention and House Ishkarat as enemies and antagonists of the typical kind of adventuring thing you'd have going on, with Vistriman and Sirtis as the more allied groups. As we deal with the trollmoots, as we go from east to west, we are going to sort of seeing this shift from most player character friendly, most Barsavian friendly in terms of their relationship with Throal and the other name givers of the lowlands, with the Stoneclaws having that most strongest relationship and being sort of a more positive or more likely ally. Although, of course, with their tradition of raiding, any of these moots could be presented as rivals or adversaries depending on what position the player characters are in. But generally speaking, as far as Crystal Raider trollmoots go, the Stoneclaws and the Swiftwinds are more positively associated with being more likely to be allies in terms of things, especially with regards to the Second War and the relationship that was likely in place between them and Throal and the other allied Barsavian powers. Mm-hmm. We will see that shift as we continue on. Because we've mentioned the Bloodlords a couple of times.
Yeah, we're getting there. Definitely getting there.
Earth Dawn tends to be nuanced, tends to not be so blatantly black and white, good guy, bad guy.
Totally.
Setting the horrors aside, the regular sort of lives of name givers are nuanced. There's not always clear-cut hero-villain, good guy, bad guy. You've got complex cultures dealing with complex problems in a world that is in some ways recovered, but in other ways still dealing with the aftermath of this earth-shattering, world-shaping event.
Yeah. I mean, all writers of Earth Dawn material, past, present, future, you and myself included, have always dealt with the non-player characters as complex individuals, and to your point, very nuanced, till the day is long. And I applaud everybody who's done that to not make things so clear-cut. Every personality should have exactly that. Personality in them, and likes, dislikes, passions, so forth and so on. So, no. Brilliant work all around, from beginning to end, and it's not ending anytime soon. So, as we explore this, I think we'll find more fun personalities to play around with if we're the game masters, and fun places to go if we are the players. So, I look forward to all of this and exploring the other trollmoots we have to talk about. So, until next time, folks, don't be Kava for your legend.
Good night, everybody.